Hello, my name is Larry Pearson, Vice President of Marketing at Impetus Technologies, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today on the topic of solving the EDW transformation conundrum. I will be your host and MC for today's session, and we're looking forward to a very productive and insightful conversation on this topic, which comes up over and over and over as we work with large enterprises on their data warehouse modernization initiatives. It's a very common discussion about the alternatives between migrating as is, sometimes referred to as lift and shift, and doing a total rethinking or re-engineering of the legacy enterprise data warehouse environment as you move into a modern data warehouse, into a modern data architecture. So we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring these two approaches and see if there's a way to strike a fine balance between the two. And also some tips and techniques from a lot of exercises with very, very sophisticated and large enterprises that will help to simplify and accelerate your end-to-end process from one to the other by applying a proven methodology and also benefiting from some powerful automation which will help with the heavy lifting. The agenda for today's session is to begin by defining these terms, migrating as is and total reengineering. I think if you're on this webinar today and in our audience, you have some understanding of what that is. You're probably wrestling with that dilemma yourself, but we will spend a little bit of time just baselining everyone's understanding as we proceed. We'll talk about some of the challenges and trade-offs between those two, and after going through this many times with many large enterprises, we've come up with a proven strategy to help, as I say, simplify and combine the strengths of each, and I hope you find that very interesting. We've also developed some powerful automation to help reduce the cost, reduce the risk, and accelerate the time to delivery on making that journey. One of the most interesting parts of every webinar is the Q&A session at the end, and you will have the ability to enter your questions, make this interactive. We'll get to those at the end of the webinar. For those that, if we have more than what we can handle live and on the air, we do promise you to answer every one of those, if not live and on the air, in an email that comes back, and encourage you to use the chat portion of your WebEx console to provide us with your questions. Now, just a couple of slides here talking about Impetus for those of you who may not be aware of us. As I said, we are leaders in data warehouse modernization. You'll see here in a minute some of the leading companies that we work with. And frankly, every time we step into one of these, they all have the same objective in mind, and that is to become a real-time data-driven enterprise that operates on a single source of truth. And that's what really has become our reason for existence and our vision, our mission statement, partnering with them to enable a unified, clear, and present view of the enterprise. We've worked across a variety of different industries, and some of the most well-known leaders in the airline industry, in the banking and card processing industry, in healthcare and telco, and others. And we would welcome you to reach out to us if you want more details on some of the specifics of these different success stories and relationships that we have that we've been able to achieve literally with companies who in most cases are Fortune 100 companies. Now, in having done that, we really have a kind of a repeatable view of what we've come to call the enterprise data 360 life cycle. And that life cycle breaks down into four critical stages. The first is the one that we'll be spending most of our time talking about today, and that is the transformation stage, where we go in and do an assessment of the existing as-is legacy infrastructure and then begin to define a to-be environment or a target architecture, and then build a roadmap, blueprints, and so forth to get you from one to the other in the most efficient and effective manner. The second stage of all that is the unification stage, where we're working and looking at your workloads. We're looking at your where you're at today with unifying both real-time and batch data processing, the whole area of data blending, data preparation, and providing federated data access including governance, security, and all the issues or all of the important challenges that implies. The third stage is the analytics stage, where we work with you to implement advanced analytics solutions for real-time stream data analytics, machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence. And lastly, we work with you through a sister company called Kairos Insights to build a very powerful BI consumption layer on top of your data lake, which allows you to build massively scalable cubes and still deliver very, very low latency against that. So this is our view of the end-to-end journey. We do recommend that you watch this in full screen mode. We've got some screenshots and some charts and things later, which will be better viewed in that manner. And what we're going to do next is show you a poll question. We try to add polls to add, again, an interactive component to this throughout our webinar. If you've been on webinars with us in the past, we always try to do this. It adds an interesting element. The first poll question says, which of the approaches below are you using in your current EDW modernization program? Migrating as is, total reengineering, a combination of both, or maybe you've not yet started down that journey, and the answer then would be none of the above. This poll will actually be open for the next 15 minutes. So we'll come back to it in 15 minutes from now and share with you the results, and look forward to having you participate in that. And as always, any questions during the presentation, you can begin to queue those up for us using the chat panel on your console. Let me begin now by introducing our two experts. The first is Sanjay Sharma. Sanjay is a principal architect within our global modern data architecture practice, spends the majority of his time, more than he would like, his wife would tell me, on airplanes, because he's out there in the trenches working every week on big companies that are in the middle of that journey and helping to solve the kinds of challenges we're talking about here today. He was a central figure in the formation of our Innovation Labs operation, and currently works directly with our largest customers on their next-gen migration efforts. He was personally instrumental in the design of the methodologies and the automation tooling that we'll be talking about today. With him also is Abhijit Phatak. Abhijit is a senior solution architect who is on the engineering team, which performs a lot of that R&D and the product development that went into, and he'll be doing the demonstration and talking about that tool as we proceed through. At this time, I'd like to ask Abhijit to jump in and start our thought leadership webinar on this topic of EDW transformation. Abhijit, over to you.
Thank you, Larry. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar session today. I'd begin with a quote from Forrester report. The report is titled, "The Next Generation EDW is the Big Data Warehouse." We all know and understand that the EDW has been analytics platform king for decades now. But the businesses are changing their requirements. Businesses are aligning their data initiative with the business goals. So there's a pressing need of modernizing legacy environments. And to make better business decisions, businesses need real-time analytics. They need analytics that can seamlessly pull data from different sources like cloud, like legacy, and like social. However, in the interactions that we've had with the clients and with the various businesses across industry, we find that they are struggling with the data usage and the access of the data for their business users. So what's the best strategy? What we're going to do today, we're going to discuss two of the most common strategies and approaches for EDW transformation, that are migrating as is and total reengineering. Alright, so in the first section of the webinar today, I will be taking you through migrating as is approach with some challenges and results. The approach is basically intuition based. Essentially, there is no assessment or profiling of the workloads that is being carried out, and there is no optimization technique that is being planned for. Optimization here is the key to get the best out of the new environment. The hardware capacity may not be planned, and the benchmarking may not be done for cost and performance. So migrating as is moving your home, but still staying with the shortcoming of your whole old home. Few of the top challenges that are typically associated with this approach is to align your EDW initiative with short-term and long-term business goals. Let's say one of your long-term goals is to create an optimized data lake architecture. But since the workloads are not profiled and evaluated, it's difficult to take a measurable step towards achieving that. The business's goal should be able to reduce the storage and computation costs and increase the performance with minimal disruption of the current system. Secondly, the same logic may not be optimized for cost and performance on the target platform. So you need to tweak and convert the logic so that it is performant and gives you the best results on the target environment. Technically, there is no one-to-one mapping of the keywords, functions, clauses between the EDW and BDW. Hence, some of the logic may not just simply work as is, and ultimately business may suffer because of it. From the business side, now let's look at some operational challenges and the operational downside of migrating as is as an approach. The EDW systems have been running for years and decades, and while they evolve and fulfill the business needs, they create a lot of irrelevant information into the system. It's difficult to identify the information or corresponding workloads in the migrating as is approach. One of the major challenges that we see here is the design and code flaws are inherited as is, and there is no possible way to get rid of that. The teams who are managing the EDWs may not be aware of the entire ecosystem, and the EDW might be fetching data from a lot of different sources. And when we are migrating to a BDW, it is the responsibility of the new environment to fetch data from all these sources, and that also in an incremental manner. Now on big data environment, we mostly store the data in a file system based format. However, performing these updates and deletes on a file system based store is a resource consuming process. Also, the migration journey does not end here. We need to orchestrate the entire process and stitch all the components together. It is important to make sure that the new logic is giving us the exact same output what we were getting in the EDW environment. Manual transformation is tedious, is time consuming, and is definitely error prone. As a result, organizations that are taking this approach take blindfolded decisions. They take misinformed decisions, and they're missing on this big opportunity to strategize for deployment models such as on-premise, cloud, multi-cloud, and hybrid deployments. According to Gartner, over 85% of the big data projects fail to deploy to production simply because workloads that do not meet the predefined SLAs never go into production. Also, the performance SLA that are known at the beginning of the process may differ in the new environment because we might be running some workloads in parallel. And managing SCD becomes more difficult because it's dependent on the data, which is mostly stored in file system based, and it requires a lot of frequent updates and deletes during the entire process. So that makes it very difficult, and that makes it very time consuming. Now, since the migrating as is exercise has not been aligned with the overall short-term and long-term business goals, there will be an overall diminished ROI of the investments made. Decision makers these days in all organizations expect a quick value-adding insight that can be monetized and transformed into business profitability. The new platform will be expected to deliver cost savings, but because the workloads have not been optimized according to the new environment, they will incur higher cost, eating up premium resources of the system. With our experience, we have learned that data model changes are essential, and the converted workloads have to adopt to the data model changes. Because of the changes, the organization have to revisit the transformed workloads and repeat the same cycle. So this was the first part of our webinar. I now invite Larry to continue and then Sanjay to take you through the second part of it.
Great, Abhijit. Thank you very much. Abhijit will be back with us later in the webinar to actually show you some of the how the assessment automation tooling that he has helped lead the development of actually works. Before we do that, though, we'd like to take a look at the poll results. You should see that popping up here on your screen momentarily. And there you see it, and thank you for responding. The question, again, had to do with which of the techniques are you currently using in your EDW modernization initiatives. And you can see here that almost half of the audience today does recognize that in either one of these alone is a suboptimal strategy. The total reengineering option, which only 6% of our attendees are, is probably some of the most challenging, but a combination of both is really almost half of us, and there's about a quarter of you who have not yet started this journey, and hopefully you'll hear some lessons learned and best practices here to help with all of that along the way. I'd like to pass the speaking to Sanjay Sharma now, and Sanjay, if you could jump in and talk a little bit about some of the challenges of a total reengineering approach.
Sure. Thank you, Larry. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Sanjay Sharma. So, Forrester report on the next generation EDW is the big data warehouse. It clearly says that in today's agile world, no enterprise can afford to build a traditional data warehouse solution for years and years. Instead, they have to modernize EDW quickly and utilize for business benefits using advanced analytics, then spending time in loading, unloading, transforming, securing, integrating, and curating data. While Abhijit talked about migration as is, reengineering is also the other approach that we deep dive into. Reengineering involves re-architecting everything from scratch. It's a complete rethink and redesign. This would involve redefining the architecture and redeveloping the code, the logic, and testing, validating the entire business logic to ensure that we are meeting the existing feature set as well as SLAs. Usually this would bring in a lot of challenges, starting from people, process, and technology impact. So we're talking about standing up a new architecture closely tied with the target platform that we are selecting. We're talking about adhering to a new platform which is more scalable, adaptable, compliant, interoperable, and the architecture also has to be reliable and future ready. Working with multiple Fortune 100 customers, we see that just the data warehouse migration or migrating the Teradata's or Netezza's of the world does not happen in silo. You have a lot of accompanying technologies, consumption tools like Tableau or Cognos or Oracle Web Reports and so on, as well as the ingestion side, starting from ETL tools like Ab Initio or Informatica or the data stage and so on, as well as the metadata security and governance strategies that have been built over the years. So not only are we talking about an architecture which is compliant with the newer platform, uses the capacity and the capabilities of the newer platform, but also ensuring that the consumption tools as well as the ingestion tools, including the strategies around governance security, are also carried forward to the newer platform. Of course, we also have to think about who would be my right vendor. If it is a cloud, what cloud to go with. If it is a in-premise Hadoop or big database platform, what would be the technology? So we are talking about a lot of technology impact. We're talking about putting in processes in place. And then lastly, we're talking about a lot of people impact as well. Not only the teams have to be aware and experts in the legacy or traditional data warehousing technologies, but also understand the target platform in and out. So training for skill set gaps really becomes a challenge. On the operational side as well, one of the biggest challenges that Abhijit was also pointing out was usually data warehouses have been built over years and decades, so we don't have an end-to-end view of what exists in the current database. So this requires a lot of initial work to understand the business logic and then come up with requirement specifications for the existing system. And of course, SLAs as well. We have run into a lot of enterprises who had workloads running over multiple years, and SLAs as well as the requirements are not really documented well. So if we go with re-engineering, we do run into short-term challenges or results where performance might be a big challenge. Of course, this might be due to people, skill set gap. It might be due to insufficient architecture, or it might be inefficient effort put in the right target platform selection. Hence, this lack of this complete picture of the existing as a state is certainly very critical. In the long term, usually reengineering efforts will again run into years and years of effort, which nobody in today's world can support. Hence, we have to bring in some kind of velocity. And of course, let's not remember that we don't end up building a data swamp. Instead, we fulfill the promise of data lake, which is meant to not only provide the same capabilities as the existing data warehouse, but also provide the newer promises around scalable analytics and self-service BI. So Forrester also says the same, that the investments you have already made in AWS will form the foundation of next generation BDW strategy. However, attaining these demands that you re-architect your existing EDW platform and invest in new technologies to deliver on new vision of right-time analytics, self-service, and intelligent and contextualized customer analytics. So we heard the story on migration as a side as well as re-engineering. So what's the right strategy? What's the better strategy? I think the poll itself talked about that. We're talking about a fine balance between both the approaches. And that's where we want to introduce the Impetus workload transformation solution, which helps us create that fine balance where we can bring in the agility and the quantity involved with the migrating as is approach, whereas we bring in the quality with the re-engineering approach. So how do we do it? We start with building the initial as-is state picture. So we will use assessment tools to identify the workloads which are not candidates for migration as is. So we'll look at the code and mark each and every workload with the technical debt it carries. We'll also be able to look at the data usage using consumption patterns analysis and be able to figure out what data is dead, what data is unused, what data is unfrequently used, and what data is duplicate. This information then can be used to build a as-is state where we will reverse engineer the logic from the code and create what we call a schema on read, which is different than schema on writes that the traditional data warehouses prescribe and use. So we are able to not only assess the code base, the data, we are also able to create a documentation as is. We are able to identify code to be migrated versus we can categorize the code as candidates for reengineering. Our experience working across multiple customers has been that this reusable code, which can be migrated as is, can be anywhere from 50 to 80%, depending on the quality of the existing code base. And then rest of it can be re-engineered. Of course, as we are talking about, even the migration as is also will be optimized, since we'll be using a schema on read based data model. And the new migrate as is code would also adhere to this new optimized schema. Whereas all the bad code or the complex code will be candidates for reengineering. So to summarize, we have the ability to use this automated workload assessment accelerator to identify and categorize the workloads into migration as is versus reengineering categories. By the way, this is not only limited to the SQL code, so BTEX scripts in Teradata Word, or stored procedures, or SQL in the Netezza Word, or Oracle, or other databases. It is also applicable to the ETL and the consumption tools. So we can do the same assessment at the ab initio or Informatica or data stage kind of ETL tool level, and same at the consumption side as well. It might be reports, which we believe will be better moved to a better target like Tableau or Click, or the newer self-service driven tool sets. It might be SaaS applications that we can look at and figure out if the usage is being done in the correct way, or we need to optimize or migrate those as is. So as a general rule, usually the moderately expensive workloads, code which is already optimized, rarely used data, will be candidates for as-is migration, whereas the complex and resource-intensive queries, resource-taking applications, or applications that are not performant in the current environment are real good candidates. For example, for one of our major Fortune 100 customers, we actually are moving some of their CXO morning reports and the entire ETL processing happening before that to produce those morning reports to be better, faster, and having more analytical capabilities in the newer Hadoop-based platform. Abhijit did touch upon the optimization aspect, but whether it is re-engineering, whether it is migration as is, optimization is certainly essential, given that the target platforms, especially the big data platforms, have their own ways of running the workloads in a way different from the traditional data warehouses. So we are expected to meet and exceed the SLAs. Of course, control costs. That's one of the other promises of the big data warehouses. We need to also ensure that we can utilize scalability somehow. So self-service and on-demand nature of these big data warehouses is certainly a great advantage. And the way to scale out in minimal cost is also very interesting. So besides technology, we also will be taking care of application and processes. Now, one of the benefits that we have seen with the overall approach is have minimal impact on the consumption side initially. Move the ETL processing, move the curation and the data cleansing, quality, other things in the initial stages, and touch upon curation and touch upon advanced analytics and curation for analytics in the later stages, but this consumption getting touched at the last. And that also helps streamline the end-to-end processes and applications, particularly DevOps. So one of the key caveats while we are doing this migration as is or re-engineering is to optimize and have the DevOps process as close, as similar to the existing processes. And of course, the optimization on the technology side, on the people side, on the process side will effectively help in building an agile environment, an agile data warehouse, and enable proactive analytics. I'll hand it over to Abhijit now to give a demo of the assessment tool, showcasing the various factors we talked about. Abhijit, on to you.
Thank you for sharing, Sanjay. Now, we discussed both the approaches, namely migrating as is and total reengineering, and the challenges that may occur in the process for both. I will now be presenting a demo of the Impetus workload assessment solution, which helps you assess workloads which can be offloaded to a new big data environment. What you see on your screen right now is an assessment created, and the process of creating this assessment is very simple in the system. So either you may connect the running EDW environment and the system would fetch the logs and do the analysis on it, or you can just upload the offline query logs into the system. In case where you do not have the offline query logs, you may upload the DDL and DML, and the system will process the complete analysis for you. Here is an assessment that we executed for one of our engagements. Here on the left of the screen, you can see the tool's recommendation of offloading 5087 queries to a big data environment. It also showcases the number of tables associated with it and the preferred query engine for the new platform. You can also see here the different statistics that are there, like select, update, delete, drop, or insert. And right next to the query types is query construct, used in all the queries like subquery, order by, group by, and join, and then the number of tables and entities involved. The assessment tool also shows you CPU and I/O utilization units to know which workloads are consuming most of the CPU and I/O bandwidth. It will also display most resource consuming applications and most resource consuming users. The analytics window shows you how many applications are running within these workloads. Execution time, CPU percentage, I/O percentage, and the total number of queries running. You can also filter with specific parameters like users, or you can go with queries, entities, statement types, or query construct. The tool then recommends you what kind of workloads can be offloaded to the new environment with other statistics. And again, you can filter recommendation based on entities, query engine, and summary. You can predefine SLAs by providing CPU and I/O utilizations. For example, if you decide to migrate only those workloads that are consuming more than 50% of your CPU, then the tool will only recommend workloads that meet the SLA criteria. So I hope I was able to explain highlights of the tool. And if you have any specific questions, you can use the chat panel right now, or you can send us an email and we can customize a demonstration for you. Thank you. Back to you, Larry.
Thank you, Abhijit. That was terrific. What Abhijit focused on during that demonstration was the assessment phase. And as I mentioned earlier, we kind of look at this journey in several different stages. He gave you some real detail here on the assessment stage where we're reading the live query logs of the DML, DDL scripts and other scripts, ETL scripts, and so forth. And we've actually spent several years of R&D developing a logic translation engine, which takes the native EDW logic and source and scripts and translates them to executable scripts and logic to run in the big data warehouse environment, whether that is planned to be on-premise or in the cloud, or in what is the case with most of our customers, some hybrid combination of both of those. So we go from assessment through the automated transformation stage. We then have a validation stage, so we can ensure that the exact table values that were in the EDW are migrated across properly into the big data warehouse environment, and at that point we're prepared to execute that in the big data warehouse side. If you want more detail on any of this, you'll see a little inquiry at impetus.com, and we can send you documentation, data sheets. We can schedule a call and talk specifically about your situation, talk specifically about some of the other experiences that we've had in which this four-stage model is being deployed successfully today across a variety of industries. So Sanjay and Abhijit, thank you so much for your presentation. What we would like to do now is do one last poll. And at this time, I would remind you all also that after we give you the opportunity to take this poll, you will have the opportunity then to have your questions answered. So if you have not taken the chance to submit those, please do that now. In addition, you will also see here on your screen a feedback mechanism, very, very important to us as we improve the user experience of our prospects and customers for all future webinars. Please rate your webinar experience today from 1 to 5. And always very important and interesting is any comments or feedback you may have about the experience that you did have today. So thank you for that. Would ask you to answer the poll question here. Would you be interested in a customized assessment of your EDW environment? And then rate your experience today and add your comments. So at this time, we'd like to move over to our Q&A portion. This is the part of the webinar that gives you the opportunity to interact directly with our experts. And we have a couple of several questions which have already come in. And the first one I will direct over to Sanjay Sharma. and it says what percentage of Impetus application workload is stream data integration versus is stream data integration, which involves transforming and loading databases, versus what percentage of the workload is actually stream analytics, updating dashboards, sending alerts, triggering sense and respond on the data stream. So that's kind of a long question, but a very, very important one. And Sanjay, if you could go ahead and jump in and provide an answer to that.
Sure, Larry. So we can transform the data integration workloads to run on the big data platform with more than 80% plus automation. So transformation and loading databases, whether happening through ETL tools or whether happening through the traditional bulk load tools or whether happening through streaming sources like Kafka or MQ, we can certainly automate most of that. On the streaming analytics side, we're talking about updating dashboards, sending alerts, triggering sense and respond on data streams. We usually prefer integrating with existing systems. So we have built systems where the output of the data warehouse is getting sent out to Kafka or other messaging paradigms to be able to fulfill those. So again, a short answer is for data integrations, transforming and loading databases, we believe that we can do 80% plus automation, whereas for integration with existing dashboards or alert management and other things, we prefer integrating with those systems, and we can automate a considerable part of that as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Sanjay. Now, this is an area, our demonstration today focused on the assessment stage. We're talking now about the transformation stage. And here again, seeing is believing. And some of the comments we've had recently when people actually see, we have demonstrations where we show the as-is EDW source and then how it gets translated over onto one of the query engines of choice in the big data environment, and there are several that we look at when we develop an optimized strategy on the to-be side of the architecture. And literally we get comments like too good to be true, automagical, can't believe that you actually can do this, because in most cases they've already tried to size the effort to do this manually. And it's an order of magnitude acceleration for the whole effort. And that's why I call it, we've automated the heavy lifting portion of the migration. There's another question that came in here, and it says, how can I benchmark the SLAs for my workloads and get recommendations, performance recommendations and optimizations to help during the modernization effort? And Abhijit, maybe you could jump in and address that one.
Sure, Larry. So as we discussed during our demo as well, so while doing the assessment using workload assessment tool, users can define the different SLAs they want to met for. Like they can define the CPU percentage, IO percentage, as well as the complexities of the workloads. And based on the parameters provided by user, this tool will automatically suggest which workloads to be migrated and recommended for migration, and which should not be.
Terrific. Thank you. We also have a question here which says, and you've started to imply that a little bit, what kinds of workloads would you consider not migrating from EDW to BDW?
So I can take that, Larry, Sanjay here. So I think our experience with the multiple customers has again and again validated the fact that low latency, high value workloads would be the candidates to move last. So think about interactive reports or complex models, SAS models or something similar that you might be running. So those are the ones that will be moved to last. will be moved last. But I think as such, we haven't really encountered anything that we would not like to, we have not been able to migrate. Of course, there are cost factors involved with that. So cost of movement, cost of running those workloads into the big data warehouse. I think those are the areas which, those are factors which enforce us to see what workload has to be migrated, what does not. And that's where our assessment allows us to see that beforehand and be able to predict what would be the cost and what would be the effort to migrate these kind of workloads.
Okay, interesting, terrific. Now, one of the things that we often find is that we'll come in and we'll begin working with them on looking at the scripts running in batch, the query workloads running in the EDW, and very often they see, wow, you've got all this automation to help me there. I also need to modernize my ETL stack. And so we have a question that came in that said, are you going to demo ETL or ELT modernization to legacy systems like DataStage Informatica, Ab initio, or others? And Abhijit, maybe you could address that. I know we've done a lot of work in that area.
Sure. Yeah, Larry. So, today we are not planning to do that demo, but we have the capability to do an ETL on the data stage as well as on the Informatica, and we can plan a one-to-one session with you for this. So I would like to bring your attention on the Informatica or data stage conversion. So based on our earlier experience, we saw that during these conversions, the optimizations and the performance is a key, because the way Informatica and data stage work, once you transform that to a big data environment, you need to consider the performance and optimization strategies, which we saw was mostly missing earlier, and that gives us basically a way ahead to convert your entire Informatica code to an engine which is able to process the data in much faster way.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Abhijit. That addresses, I'm looking here at some of the questions that have come in. Some of those coming in, we've actually already addressed. Their combinations of other questions. So I think we've addressed most of the queries that have come in. I would remind you that you can reach out to us with other questions, comments that you may have, inquiry@impetus.com. If you want to hear more about the exact success stories and case studies that I referenced from the industry examples earlier, as I say, they're all largely leading and very familiar Fortune 200 experiences. I would also ask you again, if you've not replied to this last poll, you have an opportunity there for us to follow up with you and do a very customized conversation of how these tools may apply in your environment, including how the assessment is actually conducted. We feel that the real basis for all of this is that assessment exercise, because so often the companies that we walk into, by the time we go in, they've already tried some experimentation with manual. They see how error-prone, how slow that is, how expensive it is, and it's a one-time exercise, so it's not something that necessarily is an experience that they can leverage much after that. But very often, when we do get in, what we find is that they're really kind of trying to develop these blueprints, these roadmaps, and build a strategy a little bit blindfolded, because the scale of workloads running today in these data warehouses is massive. And without having an automated way to actually look in detail at those workloads, do a fine-grained assessment, you don't have the visibility and data that you need to build a proper roadmap blueprint or strategy for going forward. And I hope what you heard today is that these tools, especially this assessment exercise, is a great way to get out ahead of that and save yourself a lot of time, reduce your risk, and save a lot of money. Any additional questions you may have can be forwarded to us, inquiry@impetus.com. We thank you so much for your time today. I trust this has been helpful to you. I want to thank our speakers also, Sanjay and Abhijit. Thank you for your questions also here from our audience. And this concludes our webinar for today. Have a great evening.